Hello everybody, it is Monday, the 22nd of January, 2018, and this is the Monday Morning Analyst. I am the host of this podcast. My name is Luke Thomas. Thank you so much for joining me. I greatly appreciate it. As you know, typically 3 parts to the podcast. We'll have a very brief overview of some sort of big picture items in the first segment. We'll take a look at some multimedia in the second segment, and then in the third segment, take a look at what's coming up in the week ahead. So in the second segment today, we're going to look at some of the wrestling of Stipe Miocic, some of the decent and then not so decent takedown defense of Francis Ngannou. As is customary on my own YouTube channel on Saturday night, I covered both Bellator and UFC 220. You can check that out right here. I'll put the post-fight show up for that. So if you want to hear some like fight-by-fight thoughts, you can go and do that. Here's some of the big picture stuff from the weekend. And by the way, subscribe to MMA Fighting Below and please like this video. Here's some of the big picture stuff on the weekend I mentioned on Saturday, but I want to sort of repeat, and I've thought about a little bit about it since the weekend. I've seen some discussion about both Francis and where he stands now, and with Stipe and where he stands now. Now, do you consider Stipe Miocic the greatest of all time? I think if you want to, you're perfectly entitled to do that. I'm not even saying that I don't agree. I think all I'm saying is, who's got the best heavyweight resume right now? Stipe Miocic does. And so if your question is, or rather, if you're equating who has the best heavyweight resume with who is the greatest all time, which I think generally is the fair comparison or the fair equation there, then that's fine. My only thing is, when you still have Cain Velasquez who could make a comeback, maybe he doesn't, right? Or when you have a guy like Stipe who is... he has the best resume, but he's still competing, and he only has the one more victory than the other guys. In other words, it's sort of like this iterativeness. Yes, iterativeness. He only has one sort of iteration beyond what everyone else has, which is not to say it's not impressive. It's massively impressive. Here's my only thing. I think that Stipe Miocic has the best resume of any UFC heavyweight ever. I think he deserves to be praised as a bare minimum of one of the best heavyweights of all time. And he may, in fact, go down as the greatest heavyweight of all time. My only thing is, the race isn't exactly over. It's not like he has put a massive amount of distance between himself and his contemporaries. It'd be interesting to see what Fabricio could do. I don't anticipate he'll beat Stipe in the future, but stranger things have happened, I suppose. Cain Velasquez, can he really make a big comeback and then fight Stipe? By the way, can you imagine a healthy Cain versus a healthy Stipe? I think that would be an incredible contest. All I'm saying is, let's wait to see what his final resume looks like when he's turned in, because what could happen is, one, maybe Cain makes a comeback, or what could happen is that, while he's only got the one more win than his other contemporaries, or one more win than some of the other guys who have held that previous record, he could go on to just get a bunch more wins and then really create some distance between himself and the field then. And I think if he does that and then he calls it a day, you could say, not only does he have the best resume, he's got the best resume in such a way that the number 2 is quite distant. And I don't think he's put enough distance between himself and everyone else. For example, I would still say personally, and this could change, we'll see what Max Holloway does. Personally, I would rank Jose Aldo as the best featherweight of all time because the body of work is so great. Yes, he's lost twice to Max Holloway. Yes, he lost to Conor McGregor. But if you look at what that guy did during his reign at featherweight, it still is today greater than what those guys did at featherweight, even if he eventually lost. Just the amount of wins and the level of competition he beat year over year and the amount of time he went undefeated is pretty spectacular. Everyone loses in the end. So the question is, in that body of work, what did you really put together? For me, Stipe has the best resume, but he just inched out the rest of that competition with that one win. He may continue to do that. Let's just see what happens. So for me, clearly and obviously, incontestably, best heavyweight resume of all time. If you want to go ahead and call him the best of all time, I wouldn't argue against it. I just want to see how this plays out because we kept doing that with Demetrius Johnson, like who's the pound for pound best? And then we'd say Demetrius, and then John Jones would come back, and then we'd say John Jones, and then GSP would come back, and they would say GSP, and it was kind of at this point where you're just like, maybe we should just wait until all these guys are done and then try and figure it out before as the next crop comes up. That's kind of where I'm at. I wouldn't argue against it. I just feel like let's wait a little bit. But certainly an impressive win. One thing that defined his win, that defined all the wins of all four fights in the co-main and main event for Bellator 192 as well as UFC 220 was really wrestling. That wouldn't be the full story. The full story is obviously a combination of things. But in the end, Daniel Cormier taking Volkan Oezdemir down and controlling him on the ground where he ultimately won. That is what, I'm not going to say won in the fight because he was beating him up on the feet a little bit, but it ultimately made made the difference. In the end, if it had just been a striking contest, maybe Francis wins, maybe he loses, but it probably would have been, at a bare minimum, a lot closer. But because wrestling was involved, and because not only did Francis spend huge portions of the round on his feet, on his knee, or rather on his knees, on his hands, and with Stipe, three-quarter stacking him, leaning into him, doing all manner of things, wrestling was a big difference for him in this contest. You go over to Bellator, Chael Sonnen, why did he win? Because he outslug Rampage. I mean, he had some decent strikes, I suppose. He's really good at landing that overhand punch that he then uses to duck under and get into the takedown. But it was a key component to him winning. You go over to the fight with Rory MacDonald and Douglas Lima. Douglas Lima was chewing him up on the feet. The real big difference in the end was the fact that Rory MacDonald was able to get the takedown. It's not some kind of revelatory insight, right? It's not some kind of like I had this deep moment of intellectual thought. I'm not suggesting that. Just a helpful reminder. And also we're talking about welterweight on up, so we're talking about some of the heavier weight classes. And I think that changes the equation a little bit harder. For example, at flyweight to get a takedown and hold a guy down. Demetrius Johnson can do it, but you've noticed that it's very difficult to do that in those weight classes, and you have to use a lot of different techniques to do it. But I'm just pointing out, wrestling still holds a really, really big place in MMA. Yes, you have to be able to do some of those other things, like Daniel Cormier striking with Volkan Oezdemir, like Stipe Miocic landing his own strikes, like Chael Sonnen finding his own entries, and even Rory MacDonald getting behind that jab a little bit. But the reality is, too, that what won them those fights in the end was their ability to change where the fight was being contested and to amass either points or damage or both in those spaces. Pretty important to consider that as well. Now, back to Francis Ngannou. What do you want to say about him? I know a lot of people really down on him after this performance. And look, you got to give credit to Stipe for what was ultimately a very, very dominant win. No doubt about it. Again, easily the best resume in UFC heavyweight history. However, I am not so quick to bury Francis just yet. People are like, well, he was a little bit overhyped. Yeah, he was promoted properly. That's kind of what overhyped means. No one really knows what's going to happen. It's possible that he could have gone in there and landed a big shot and closed the show on Stipe. Stipe got stopped within 2 rounds by Stefan Struve a few years ago. It's not Francis can knock out anybody. In the end, what was shown was that the hype necessarily didn't always match the overall skill level, at least insofar as it was needed to fight and compete against Stipe. But he looked overwhelmed, but to me there was enough reason to believe he could build on those things. So what we're going to look at in the second segment is some of the things he did right and a lot of the things he did not do so well. And it's pretty clear that what he has is he doesn't have if he had a fully mature skill set and was doing some of those things, you'd say, well, that's just kind of who he is. And I don't really know what the future holds for Francis Ngannou. Maybe he doesn't get much better, maybe he does. But here's what we've seen up to this point. In a 2-year span, he stopped 6 UFC fighters all before, I believe, the second round. So it's a 2-year span, 6 fighters. 2 of those were former champions. One of them still a very, very high-level contender in Alistair Overeem. That's a very good body of work. Now, the problem with being a guy with power is you can amass this resume where guys are just getting blown all out. You're blowing the doors off of guys early, and then someone says, "Oh my God, this guy is just an unstoppable monster." You have to see what someone is like in MMA, having someone put it on them before you really know. And we hadn't seen anybody really put it on Francis, at least not in the UFC. And now we finally got a chance at seeing that. Here's my point. I saw some people on Twitter being like, "Well, is he the new Sukuju? Is he the new Czech Congo?" First of all, those are weird comparisons because they're just big, black, strong African guys. So it's like a very weird comparison. But let's talk about the Sukuju one. The Czech Congo one doesn't make any sense at all. But the Sukuju one, people are like, well, is he just a flash in the pan? Sukuju had 2 wins over Ricardo Arona and Little Nog, and those were impressive, and he got them quickly. And that's what catapulted him to stardom. But after that, he was very much sort of a middling fighter. He couldn't really do a whole lot after that. Had a couple of decent wins here or there, but I think he beat Kazuhiro Nakamura and Jan Blachowicz down the line, but he has a lot of losses too. Go back to what I said about Francis. Francis had a 2-year span where he beat 6 guys, all of them by stoppage, 2 of them former champions, one of them still a very high-ranked contender. That's a lot. That's just a better body of work. It's a much more reliable indicator of overall talent level. It's also an indicator, based on how he performed, that he has even further to go. But to get that good that quickly tells me that he has a lot of room to continue growing if he's put in the right place and he puts in the right kind of effort. And that the comparison to Sukuju, while he's also from Cameroon, just not very fair. That guy had really made a resume off of 2 wins, and then that was early in his career too, by the way, very early, I think within the first 5 fights, and then after that was just very much up and down. Now, we'll see what happens with Francis. I can't predict the future. I don't know. All I'm saying is much better wins, much more consistency, much greater amount of time against much more elite opposition. And while he had a major shortcoming on Saturday, a lot of reason to believe that he can get stuff done in the future. As for Chael and Rampage at Bellator, it was the same kind of Chael you saw from the Vanderlei fight, including some of the same setups. He gets a takedown from a trip. He likes to sit in half guard, change his base to look backwards at the legs, not forward at the heads. And then he sort of goes and tries for a far side Kimura. It's a very, very common tactic. He likes that one a lot. It's good for controlling a guy as well. Rampage, I didn't think looked terrible. It looked like Rampage, like the same kind of Rampage you've been seeing for a long time. He really hasn't developed his skill set at all. And there was a point there where he was like a raw athletic talent and was really developing. He's the guy who stopped takedowns from Kevin Randleman. But it's interesting to note that the takedowns that Chael uses, he used to use a lot of doubles and singles, and now he uses a lot of trips. Remember that same trip that TJ Dillashaw used on John Lineker, where it's like a double, but instead of like a knee pound, you put your leg around the back of theirs, and then you kind of fall with them on top of him. He used that one. He used a lot of inside trips where you get the clinch, block an arm, trip to that side, rotate them that way so that they can't. And yet when you rotate, you hook the leg, and then you kind of drop and turn at the same time. It's like this. It's like that. You just drop and turn at the same time. You don't just drop your hips and pull out the leg. You drop the hips, pull out the leg as you turn into it, right? You turn into the leg you're tripping, and he would do it with the underhook, or excuse me, the pinched overhook. So he's really sort of using, I think, interesting takedowns, which was different than what Rory MacDonald did, where he would get a body lock either with a double underhook or a pinch, and then he would just force. He'd lean and rotate Lima to a side, and then turn him until he could no longer balance, and then push him and turn him in a circle, right? Kind of a very, very difficult way to take someone down unless you're really good at it, but he's really good at it. So very, very impressive there. I got this hair on my face this whole time. It's driving me nuts. Sorry. In any case, but back to Chael and Rampage. So Chael's going to fight the winner of Fedor versus Mir. That should be interesting, depending on what happens. I don't really know what to make of Mir at this point. I guess we'll see. Fedor, I think, is obviously long in the tooth and not what he once was, but it's a decent fight for Bellator to make. With respect to Douglas Lima and Rory MacDonald, two things I want to mention. Number one, Douglas Lima, the guard, he was really good at not letting his guard get past. In fact, he had one moment, I think, in the fourth round where he was able to, from a Rory MacDonald clinch takedown attempt, trip him, and then you see Rory try to turn off of his hip, and then Douglas take him out pretty quickly. I mean, just nasty on the ground, Douglas Lima is. But he's got a very circa 2008 kind of approach to the guard where he's really good at closing up full guard, getting an overhook, getting a collar tie, inside bicep, rolling with punches underneath. But he's stuck in this position. If I clasp my legs around your waist and I'm looking up at you, what can I do in terms of mobility? Not a whole lot, right? Because I can't use my legs. Now, I can sit up into you. I can use that for submissions. I can use it for sweeps. There was a one time where he tried to get a butterfly sweep where he had the hook in and then he had the arm locked and he tried to turn him and couldn't quite get it. So once you do that, it's like if you're not going to go for submissions, that's okay. Go for sweeps. If you're not going to go for submissions, you're not going to go for sweeps, that's okay, but you got to get up. But what you can't do is just hold full guard. You're literally locking your legs into place and saying, I'm not going to move from this spot. There's no submissions from guard. I mean, I guess you could do like an Ezekiel choke no gi, but there's basically no submissions from guard with a full guard. The guard has to get opened up. You can use the full guard to set up submissions, but to get that arm bar, the legs have to come apart. To get that triangle, the legs have to come apart. To get that omoplata, legs have to come apart. You get the idea. So you can. BJ Penn has a whole book on stuff from the closed guard, but you can't just stay completely 100% locked at all times from the closed guard. It's got to get open a little bit, and I just feel like that cost Douglas Lima ultimately in the fight. Now, one last word about Rory MacDonald. I'm sure you guys have all seen the pictures of that incredible hematoma that he had on his leg. For him to have the just the ability to persevere the way he did, I was so impressed. I was so blown away. Rory MacDonald, he has taken a lot of damage in his career, and he took some even more in this one. But I don't know how you walk away and not say to yourself you're completely impressed by him. He had a serious gut check moment in that fifth round. It was very easily 2-2 based on, the scores in the end didn't show that way, but, well, not totally that way. But in your mind, you could have easily seen it as 2-2. And I'm sure in his mind he was like, this could be 2-2. You had to go out there and win it. And he went right after it, got the takedown. In fact, even in the fourth round, he waited till the leg got kicked so he could grab it, then pull it. So he was willing to eat the shot to be able to go forward with the takedown plan. And in the 5th round, coming right out there and doing it the way he did. Very impressed by the absolute will and determination of a guy like Rory MacDonald. I would like to see him take less punishment. You can honestly see why St. Pierre spent a big chunk of his career, just wrestling guys. Because when you're fighting at welterweight, my God, man, you are going to fight some absolute monsters if you want to fight at the very best. And you're going to fight guys like Douglas Lima, and they're going to hurt you. I can almost, now looking back on it, I have a little bit more sympathy for St. Pierre and fighting the way he did, because, Jesus, man, you want to fight all these guys, you got to do it in a way where if you're going to have any kind of longevity, taking this off of the feet is pretty critical. So my hat goes off to Rory MacDonald. I mean, you want to talk about answering the call. Wow. Very, very impressive for him to go do that when he was getting, tuned up a little bit with that leg. A warrior. Both guys are warriors. Douglas Lima was a warrior too, but that was a real gut check moment. Wow. Very, very impressive. Okay, so let's do this. There was a lot of complaints about the takedown defense of Francis Ngannou. People saying he had none. Not quite true. He has some. Clearly not enough. The big issue for me is he's got enough takedown defense from open space anyway. It's not great, but he can easily get a lot better at that. It's going to be some of those finer details about positioning and transitions on the ground, about digging underhook, how to stand properly, how to get up properly. So the big question for him is going to be how he moves forward. Let's see how he did it, though, over the weekend. We mentioned that wrestling was not the entire story of how the main and co-main events went at Bellator 192 and UFC 220. But I also mentioned that it was a critical component and perhaps even a common denominator. Stipe Miocic was able to retain his title in part because, yes, he could strike some with Francis Ngannou and do pretty well in certain stretches, but really the major difference was that component. You look at how Daniel Cormier won. It wasn't necessarily with striking with Volkan Oezdemir, although he did have some success in that department as well. It was getting the takedown, getting on top. We're going to look at Bellator as well. Rampage Jackson losing, of course, to Chael Sonnen for the same reason. And the one thing saving Rory MacDonald after getting his leg brutally kicked was, of course, the wrestling takedown. So let's start with Stipe Miocic. And let's look at, we're not going to go through anything but the first 2 rounds because after that you kind of get the idea about how it goes. The commentator, Dominic Cruz, noting that the single leg was a better weapon for Stipe Miocic against Francis Ngannou, in part because it would force a big guy to balance. There's also some other parts to it, too. It's also a more economical entry generally, and it's a more economical entry specifically. Now, here's what I mean by that when I say economical. How much effort does it take to get from your position where you're standing, like this, to a position where you're now close the distance, you've got your left arm wrapped under his knee and your other arm maybe wrapped same side, you're grabbing your own arm. There's a lot of grips you can actually do under a guy's leg. It's not one grip, although a lot of guys just sort of gable grip with the inside hooking arm. But the point being is how much effort does it take to get from where you're at to there? The answer is not much generally, and in particular, as I mentioned, not much here. I want you to pay attention to something. We had Jimmy Smith I spoke to before this contest, and I was saying, what are some of the downsides of Francis Ngannou striking? He's like, well, not much in terms of like power, obviously, and he's got pretty good accuracy too, and he's got good sense of things, but he's a little loopy. He's a little loopy with the strikes. This is going to be a perfect example. I want you to note how Miocic takes advantage of the loopiness with a very economical entry. So here we are. You're going to see, you can see, by the way, look at Ngannou just sort of like telegraph. We're going to bring his right up like he's ready to go. So by the time the left starts coming around, look at the left. Look how far away it is from his body. Very, very easy to time. It's a big, very powerful shot. Don't misunderstand me. He's throwing it with a lot of force and a lot of speed given his size, but he's really telegraphing it. Now watch this. Also look at the front leg of Ngannou. Look how high he raises it here. Look at that. Almost like he's going to do a Superman punch or something, right? So he steps wide, and he's going to come under it. Boom. And here he is. He gets to grab. Now you can already see Miocic is kind of, look how far forward he is, right? He's leaning way over himself. Whereas, and Ngannou's leaning a little bit over himself, so he's still reaching a little bit here. It's not a super deep entry at first. He has to kind of fight for it, pick him up here. He's got to, drive into him. Yeah, you're going to see that. And he's got to turn him to get the leg to come in like this, and he's going to pick up, and this is where you're going to see Francis try to get an arm in front, right, to create a crossface, to help create some separation. If you can create a crossface, you can then drive your hips back as you drive your arm forward. It can be very, very helpful in that regard. But what is Stipe going to do? He's just going to rotate him in a circle and then drive him straight back. Look at that. See that? See that step that Miocic takes? Look, you already saw him turn him in a circle this way, right? So he's turning him clockwise. As he gets him at this angle, now he's going to run him straight back, and he's going to step with the outside foot and drive, right? It's almost like a knee tap at that point. Now, he's not changing his grip to go to a knee tap. A knee tap might be where you pull up on one side and then block the other at a sideways angle, and that way they just go on over. You typically do it to the outside of the knee with one hand. St. Pierre was the master of this, right? It's almost like a knee tap, but he doesn't actually need to put it on there because he can just sort of run him into the fence at this. Look at this. Turn him and then step out and push that direction. And he almost sort of falls. He almost keeps turning as well. He doesn't go straight back into the fence. He kind of gets sideways into the fence. See how it's the left side of Miocic's body and the right side of Ngannou. But pretty good job here. And then, of course, he was able to execute the takedown. Let's look at some other examples that he was able to do in this fight. People said the takedown defense of Francis Ngannou was trash in this fight. And look, it obviously needs a lot of work to be able to contend for a title. But there were some moments that I think showed, yes, he gets by a lot on strength, right? He gets good enough technique and then finishes it off with strength. And that in part drains him. And this, in fact, in some ways helped Stipe at this particular moment we're about to show because everything kept draining him. But I just want to show an example here. You see here, Francis stepping in with a jab, trying to find an uppercut. Miocic gets to the inside, and what does he do again? He's going to go for a single. And this one's actually pretty deep. Look at that. That's pretty deep. Head on the outside, body on top of the thigh of Francis. That's good. He's going to push into him, but look at Francis. Immediately gets his hips back. He's leaning his weight into that shoulder, and then that left arm of his is getting in between. Let's see what he does with it. You're going to see Stipe try to rotate him into a circle, but Francis pulls up on with his right arm. You see him pulling up here. He's going to pull him up off of his hips, and he's going to do that now. He's dug the underhook. Now he's created separation between them. So look how fast he was able to do that, right? Super quick for a heavyweight who had and this was Stipe on a nice shot, man. Look at this. That is good. That's really good by Stipe. But Francis had his hand low, gets in front, pulls him up, turns his hips, look at Francis. Look at his bottom heel. Look how it's corkscrewed in. So he's not just picking him up and turning. Even with the turn, he's still turning inside of the turn to get even more an angle to change that, to break the space, which enables him to get the underhook and then create some space. Now, Stipe ran him back into the fence. You can see this is almost like a knee tap. Left hand up top, right hand to the outside, but it's just, there's not enough there. So he does manage to get Francis back to the fence, and that's not nothing, but it deserves to be noted that Francis clearly does have some skills. They're very unrefined, and they rely a lot on his athleticism, but it looks to me like things you can build on. Let's look at some other examples. Okay, here we have Francis pushing Stipe back into the fence. He's throwing strikes, and Stipe has backed out to this point. So what does that tell you? That tells you that Stipe reads that Francis has a bit of, I won't say uncoordinated, but a bit of linear, perhaps, Francis is moving into him, and he's not paying attention to getting his hips back because he's so concerned with forward pressure. So watch what happens here. He's going to step. He's laterally, cutting the cage off here a little bit, and you can see he's probably going to wind up hands by his waist, which is okay because you have to defend the takedown potentially, so he knows that's coming, right? He's going to jab, and what does Stipe do? Immediately gets under it, dodges the uppercut, and then look at this. Now you've made contact on him. Look, now you've got contact on him, and you've got contact. In truth, you've got a twisted hip, but you want to twist the hip on the way. To me, like you kind of want to twist the hip on the way down, and you at least want to have an underhook as well at the same time. So it's fine. Like when you do a sprawl, a lot of people just drop their hips straight down, and you can do that. You actually want to drop your hips at an angle. So you drop to one side. You almost like look to your left, or when you drop your hips, look to your right. You don't just look straight down or look straight up. You kind of want to turn. But it also necessarily requires you to really A, get down, and B, you want to have that underhook as well. He doesn't have either of that. So what is Miocic going to do? He's just going to use that momentum to drive him back. Boom. Boom. Okay? Very, very good. Very, very good. Just a total recognition spatially of what was needed as we sort of rewind here. One more time. It's just good timing. It's just good timing. If your shots are loopy and your pressure is a little too heavy forward, whoop, boom. Totally has hit. Where is all of Francis's weight going at this point? Right? It's coming towards us in the screen. It's laterally moving across his body with that punch, which means that this structure is going to be easy to take down because the weight is it's planted in a way for Miocic to be able to easily uproot it. It's not planted in a way that structurally enables him to sit down and stop this. He's getting hit at an angle, right? He's getting hit at an angle. So it's a nice double, gets behind the leg, uses his head. Look at the head of Stipe Miocic. His head is a battering ram and then crashes with him to cover him on the bottom, right? Doesn't just sort of take him down and let him fall and then gets on top of him. Crashes with him. Very, very good job by Stipe Miocic. Let's keep going. I want to show something here. This, to me, was the really, really bad sign for Francis. He had a lot of moments in this fight which were not necessarily great. This was probably the worst of them. Here you have Stipe Miocic, who is literally not covering him at all. Watch this. He's throwing punches, and look at what Francis does. Look at that. See how he is back flat on the mat, and he's literally reaching his hands in the air like a child would who's being put in a crib or something. This is a really bad sign. If someone is giving you that space, their chest is not covering your chest, there's no knee on belly here, there's nothing. You need to be sitting up immediately. He either was too tired or just didn't know that's what he was supposed to do in this context. That's a bad sign. Technically, when you see somebody do this, they are just sort of forgetting positionally that they're in that space, and what you're looking at is a natural, untrained human reaction of just reaching. If you don't know what you're doing in jiu-jitsu and your back's on the mat like this and someone gives you space, a lot of times you'll just see it's a natural reaction. If someone is punching and you don't know what you're doing, what do a lot of people do? They put their hands out in front of them. Putting your hands out in front of you is not necessarily wrong in certain cases, but in this one, it just shows that he's reacting off instinct. I'm sure he's been shown what to do here, and maybe he was just overwhelmed in the moment or he was tired, but this is like a really bad sign. Look at this. I mean, he's just sort of like trying to grab onto him here. This was one of the worst things I saw for him all fight. I mean, Miocic did him almost a favor here. Look at Miocic. He's got one hand on the mat. He's got his knees on the mat. He doesn't even have live toes, nothing, and he's just banging on him here. And Francis is trying to get underneath, and then eventually he goes to cover because he realizes at some point Francis gets the clue he has to stand. And I think look at Miocic. He hooks the leg here to bring him back down. See that? If you hook the leg, this is almost like a Turk. A Turk is used to sort of roll someone and turn them in a direction. You know, Mike Goldberg always talked about Turks, but he always talked about a Turk like an inside hook. It's actually like from half guard or something. It's actually more like this, where you use this, you then pick them up. You use your left arm in this particular case to drive them with the forearm back down. You know, fine. Here, it's gone back to a point where a guy has the technical limits. But when we're back here, right? When we're back here, let's go back to this real quickly. Look at this. I mean, this was like, of all the things I saw in this fight, this was the most troubling by far, right? He's getting pounded on. One more time as we look back on this. This is so bad. So bad. I'm sure his coaches know this. His coaches are smart. They're great coaches at what they do. But there's no doubt about it. He needs some work in this position, and a lot of it. Last one from round one. Here we go. Pressing forward. Right. He's hitting him with strikes. Boom. Kind of lands here a little bit. Like the minimal left of Ngannou lands, and that right lands. Stipe's head gets tossed around, but they're both landing on each other. But Stipe ducks the punch, these big looping punches, head first into him, drives back. Now you say, well, look, he's got the underhook here. Shouldn't that be enough? But he's still bent over. Once you have the underhook, you got to drive your hips forward. You got to pull them up. You got to get maybe another overhook on the other side, or keep digging for the other underhook. But look what he does. He just kind of stays bent over and walks back. Right? Like, he's not really pulling him up. He's got the underhook there. It's in place, but it's not working. He's not yanking him up off of his hips. He's not then also, you could, if you can't pull them off your hips because they're this far in on you, you can also keep it in there and you can push their head away. You sort of turn your hips. He could be looking to his right, shift his hips the other way, really break him off there, then dig for the other side underhook, right? Because he's got an overhook on this side. You see that? He could be using this to then turn these hips that way, but he doesn't. He just keeps backing up straight. So what's Stipe going to do? Puts his hands together. Look at his hands here real quick. Puts his hands together, picks them up, pulls his weight into him, right? And look at the underhook. It's there, like he stuck it there, but it's not affecting anything. He's not using it in any kind of real way. So Stipe gets to his feet, right? Picks him up, pulls him in, and then crashes with him. Boom. Not exactly crashes, but there you go. Get the idea. Let's look at round 2. All right, now we move to round 2. You're going to see a lot of the same mistakes, and including some extra breakdown there that's going to happen. And here's what I mean. Like, whatever he was doing in that first round, some of it worked, a lot of it didn't. Even less of it works here, but it's a lot of the same stuff. Like, here's an example what we're about to see. You're going to see that Ngannou is moving into him, and he's not really cutting off the cage. Like, he's moving laterally kind of, but he's moving more so in a linear way, which Stipe uses to back up, bring him forward into him, so that when you're bringing someone forward, their weight's going that direction. It makes it sometimes a lot easier than to take them off of their feet, right? They just don't have an ability to get their weight behind them and their hips down like they need to. So here's what I mean by this. You can see he's kind of moving into him. It's not really cutting off the cage, right? He's going to step into him, watch Stipe, times the jab, boom, comes underneath. All right, so now it looks like he's trying to go for a double from this point. Now, which way is he going to run him? The way he should run him is not into us, blast double style, but this way, across. Watch exactly what he does here. Boom. And now he kind of gets into a blast double scenario in a different direction. But look at his feet moving. And I want to go back here for a second. Number one, what you're paying attention to is the head and arms and the feet in particular of Stipe Miocic, right? Grabbing behind the legs. What you want to watch is look at Francis. He doesn't really do anything. He's got an overhook on one side. He's not underhooking. He's just moving his feet. And then now, as Miocic continues to just drive, Francis is just like running backwards with him. He's not really digging anything underneath to stop it, and he gets pushed up against the cage here very hard. It's like he was waiting until the cage hit his back before he was even able to do something. He doesn't drop his hips. He doesn't fight the hands. And in fact, even if he wasn't going to be able to stop the takedown from this point, he should already be trying to fight it. You can see it's almost like he's waiting to get taken down before he stops fighting it. But the truth is, even if you get taken down, if you're halfway towards stopping, I mean, not the takedown anymore, but let's say you tried to stop a takedown, you got halfway there, but they ultimately took you down. Your arms are still going to be in a place that they need to be in order to potentially get back up, to potentially create some separation, to do a lot of things you're going to need to do even in this new physical scenario. You shouldn't wait to fight everything until after the takedown happens. Fight right away and then keep fighting in the new scenario, because chances are inside control is always going to matter. Underhooks are always going to matter. They're going to matter whether you're underneath. They're going to matter whether you're standing. They're always going to matter. Look at him. He doesn't even really try. He just has the one underhook. He just kind of he tries to put his hand down to brace and gets run into it. And now he begins to start to work on this. Now he tries to get up and he just He-Mans it. Look at this. He just drives his leg out here and then uses that to sit his hips out, which now you've got Stipe kind of behind him here, driving his weight forward and pulling it in. Now, this is what I want to show you here. So now you've got Stipe. He's got one arm around the waist. This is going to help him control any kind of ascent or any other, he's just got an arm around the hips. That's going to give you a lot of opportunity to pull them, to push them, to off-balance them. It just gives you a sense of some measure of control over, obviously, maybe the most important part of someone's body in terms of what fighting is concerned. And he's got his legs over the one leg of Ngannou, so he can ride it if he needs to. He can scoop it if he needs to. He can do a lot with it, right? But this is the right place to be. Now you see Ngannou here. Look at Ngannou controlling the wrist here. This would be okay it's not like you don't want to fight their wrists, but you don't want to fight their wrists like this, because watch what happens when the camera angle changes, right? He's putting all this weight all this effort into controlling that wrist so Stipe can't get his hands together. Look, Stipe is scooping that leg, which is going to keep his leg flared out, which is going to drive his knee down. It's going to keep his weight down. Plus, he's got this arm over the hip, and he's sagging his weight down. Look at him like a wet blanket. Look at this. All on top of him like that, right? By controlling the wrist in this position where he's on a tripod, look at his face. His face is holding him up here. This is no good. This is no good. This is not an effective form of wrist control. You want to have wrist control. It's not that it's not worth fighting for a second, but your hands in this scenario would be much better served on the mat, covering your face, and using it to get yourself up off the canvas and then potentially finding an underhook. When you do it this way, he can just sag his weight on top of you, and now your face is carrying all this weight, plus you're getting scooped here. This is not doing you a whole lot of good. Now, Ngannou retracts his knee, which prevents that a little bit, but now he's getting even more crowded. So let's see what happens here. You're gonna see Stipe. Yes, Stipe can't necessarily do a whole lot here, but neither can Francis, and Francis is the one in the negative position. So Stipe is going to use this to step on it, and now he's stripped the grip, and now he comes up. All right, so now he's banging on him, and let's see what happens here. He's just. I want to show you something. Now he's got what's called. It's not exactly right, but he's got almost like a 3/4 stack here. I want to pay attention to something. What is so bad about this position? A lot. It's not merely that you're carrying the weight on the back of the neck, which then means you're carrying the weight on the lower back because they're all connected. On top of that, now your wrists are carrying the weight. Now your shoulders are carrying the weight. Now your traps are carrying the weight. All of this is it's like Atlas trying to hold up the earth. Like it's not it's not just your hands or something that might hurt. All of it gets affected. All of it gets affected. And so as a consequence, it's just a really, really, really terrible place to be. It's where you want to spend minimal time in one of these crouch scenarios. And look at Stipe. He's just leaning into him, driving that weight down. And Francis doesn't know the proper procedure to stand here. It's probably, oftentimes, it's going to be the other leg that you want. If Stipe really wanted to, he could hook. Now, he doesn't have the grip of the 3/4 stack. He doesn't have his hands tied together and then, flaring out an elbow on top of the back of the neck. But it doesn't necessarily matter all that much. It's just enough to keep all that pressure and weight down. Otherwise, Francis would just pop to his feet. This is, it's really terrible stuff. Okay, a little bit further. Now Francis is standing, but look at that weight, man. He's just driving on the back of the head. If someone's putting their hands on your neck, someone's putting their hands on your head, you got to fight that immediately. You ever seen two wrestlers out there facing off, and one guy puts his hand on his face? What's the other one going to do? He's going to swat it off immediately. Now, some of that is not necessarily to exert pressure in the way you see here, but you just don't let them ever establish that. Look at me, he's literally standing in the air, and Stipe is driving his head down. This was terribly taxing on you. And again, not just the back of your neck, not just the back of the small of your back, but your hands and your shoulders and your rhomboids. Everything is getting affected through something like this, right? Okay, you see, here we go. Look at this. You see Francis taking his left leg, and he's doing that as like a post to lean into the fence. But that means that the foot underneath, while the weight is being driven into the fence, is going to be easy to scoop and kick out. I'm assuming that's what Stipe is about to do here, or at least get behind him and then press the knee in. Let's see what he does. So Stipe is going to step his feet out. He's going to push down and forward, and he's going to throw Ngannou here, because if you look back, there's nothing keeping the structure up. Right? His weight is forcing down, but if you force forward, if you throw it forward, he has to reset. That's what that left hand is, and then the right hand has to reset too. But at that point, a knee has to come up to create a structure because of the imbalance. Right? He just never has stable structures under him that will enable him to stand or resist the pressure. And look, Stipe is still on the back of that head. He's still leaning into it. He's still driving into it all this time. Let's see how this continues. And as you can see, it just continues. It's the exact same way. Here they are on their knees. It's going to continue a little bit here. Stipe is going to come up to his feet a little bit, driving into him. Look on the balls of his feet, driving in. Right? And Ngannou can only just be on all fours, and this is so taxing. And then look at Stipe. He's going to look what he did very, 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 very quickly. It's sort of like a collegiate wrestling ride a little bit. Not exactly, but a little bit. Watch this. Watch the left leg. He's on his toes here. Watch. He's going to sink in with that left and then turn. You see that? See that late turn there? That's just him just hanging on the back of Ngannou. Now, he changes it for a second because it probably wasn't that stable, and then he just goes to the knee to the body and then comes back down. But then I just want to point out, he's just got all kinds of mastery when it comes to the rides here in a position like this. Right? Pretty incredible stuff. And you can see Francis just totally overwhelmed. Really had no idea what to do in a scenario like this, but how could you expect him to? He's been in MMA for such a short amount of time. Stipe is just way ahead of him. And last but not least, we take a look at what's coming up in the week ahead. The big one is going to be a Fox card, UFC on Fox 27, or UFC on Fox Jacare versus Brunson 2 at the Spectrum Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's going to be a 8 o'clock main card, 4 fights. Love it. Okay, in the main event, Jacare Souza is back against Derek Brunson. In your co-main, Dennis Bermudez takes on Andre Feely. Jordan Rinaldi is back against Gregor Gillespie. Keep your eye on that kid. Drew Dober versus Frank the Crank Camacho. Then you move to the Fox Sports 1 prelim card. Bobby Green is back against Eric Koch. That should be fun. Mirsad Bektic versus Godofredo Pepe. Caitlin Chukagian versus Mara Romero Borella. Yeah, I believe that's her name. Randa Marcos versus Juliana Lima. Justine Kish versus Ji Yong Kim. Vink Pichel versus Joaquim Silva. And then one fight on your prelim card, Nico Price taking on George Sullivan. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? What do you want to say to me? Do an email. Shoot me one there at LukeThomasNews@gmail.com. I'll read those as well. Plus, I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Luke Thomas News as well. All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Like the video below. Subscribe to MMA Fighting. Lots of coverage coming your way for UFC on Fox 27. And until next time, enjoy the fights.